welcome everyone to this third lecture of the academic year 2024-2025. And I'm really proud and honored to have here Eleonora Buonocore from the University of Calgary. She's associate professor of Italian studies, and she's an expert on many topics, I would say, but mostly Dante Alighieri. Eleonora studied both in Italy as well as in the US. She got a PhD from the University of Siena in philosophy, medieval philosophy, and then she got another PhD from the University of Yale and on Italian studies. She recently published a very interesting kind of book, Imaging Networks in Pre-Modern Italian Literature, in which she studies the voice of women. This is a very interesting kind of topic, which leads to the study of mothers, of sisters, of everyone who would have been considerable part of an environment which gave birth to the idea of the Renaissance. Tonight lectures is on Dante Alighieri, but it's mostly on the idea of memory. And I have briefly read the abstract that she will present tonight, and the two main topics will be connected to paying attention to two very important figures of the Divine Comedy, Brunetto Latini and Pier delle Vigne, both set in hell, and both for different reasons damned by Dante Alighieri. So, Eleonora Buonocore is here for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Thank you so much, Dr. Riccardelli, and everyone for being here. I'm really, really honored to be here at Kent State and to present to you some of my research. So this is part of my book. I'm on sabbatical in Italy this year, and I'm presenting to you like research in action. So this is literally like an excerpt from my book on memory in Dante. And so I'm going to talk to you about rhetorical memory. Well, sorry, it's not supposed to happen there. About rhetorical memory. But, why? What's happening here? Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about rhetorical memory as an infernal trap. So what I'm arguing is that memory in Inferno is part of the punishment, is a trap for the souls. But we're going to start a little bigger. We're going to talk about memory as a fundamental human ability, right? So we have a sense of self because we remember. And we learn anything through memory, right? We need memory to perform almost any task that we have in our daily life. And imagine if memory is this important nowadays that we can hold, everything, all knowledge in our phones. Imagine how memory was important in the ancient and medieval world, since those society had less opportunity to record, right? Papyrus, pergamene, paper were all expensive. And they were rare, and they were only for few privileged people, often males, right? And only them could read and write. And so memory was paramount, was fundamental. We can find evidence of how important memory was in the metaphors that we still use to refer to memory, right? Which shows how memory is pervasive in society. There are many, many metaphors for memory. So we can see that memory is a computer drive. We use it now, right? All of you. How much memory has your phone? How much memory has your computer, right? That is fundamental. So in the ancient times, it was first a wax tablet, and then it was a book, right? But that's the same idea. And there's also memory as a storehouse. How much can you store memory, right? How much storage do you have? The storehouse of memory. And memory as a monument, fame, and then the banquet of memory, and then also memory as the mother of the muses, which is another one, and then the memory palace, the art of memory, which we are briefly going to talk about. And then we are going to talk about the opposite, right? The rivers of memory and the rivers of forgetfulness, which Dante will use at the end of Purgatory, in fact. And that is where my book kind of ends. So all of these memory metaphors have one common trait. They're all used in the Divine Comedy. Dante uses all of them. And that's kind of where the research for my book started. So all of these metaphors attest to the key role that memory played in the Middle Ages. And it was ubiquitous everywhere, in medieval education, from rhetoric to philosophy, and even theology. So Francis Yates published a really important book in 1966, called The Art of Memory, and Merrick Ruthers in 1991 called The Book of Memory, where she looked at the metaphors of the Book of Memory. And so now memory is also an important topic in the scholarship on the Middle Ages. But what surprised me when I started looking at this is that despite how important this topic is, today there is no book on Dante and memory. And I mean, scholars here will tell you, there is a book on Dante and everything. How many books there are on Dante and prophecy? Probably like 15, 16 only in the last 30 years. There's a book a year on Dante. How many on Dante and friendship? I think there are like 6 or 7 in the last 10 years. There is not one book on memory in Dante, which is why I need to finish this book today. So my research places Dante in the context of the medieval theories of memory by tracing how he conceptualized memory. This journey begins in the Vita Nuova, which was famously known as the Book of My Memory. Let me go to the Vita Nuova. And it says, right, the beginning of the Vita Nuova, he starts with an explicit mention of his memory, right? He says, in that part of the Book of My Memory, which before little can be read, there is a heading that says, Incipit Vita Nuova. Here begins the new life. Right? And here Dante compares the structure of his memory to a medieval manuscript, right? That has the rubrication, as you can even see here, right? Like this is the actual manuscript of the Vita Nuova here in the Nazionale in Firenze. So starting from all that, my book shows how in Inferno, rhetorical memory is revealed to be a trap, since the sinner is eternally stuck in the moment of their sin, right? They are repeating their sin. And then the second stage of my book will show how in purgatory memory becomes positive because it's linked to the power of intercession of prayer. And so the dead and the living gets together in a dialogue through prayer in which they can help each other and reduce the time of penance. Finally, at the end of purgatory, there will be a change, and there will be these two rivers, the river of forgetfulness and the river of good memory, to show how memory needs to change and become more fluid. And it will be connected to theological memory, meaning to an oblivious memory, right? A memory informed by oblivion, because the souls will have to pass through the river of forgetfulness, so through Lethe, and then regain their memory through the second river, the river of good memory. And so what I argue at the end of my book is that the only memory left at the end of Paradiso is that it's necessary to help others. But that's the book. For this presentation, you don't have to worry about going through much. We're just going to focus on 2 encounters on Dante's hell, precisely in the circle of violence. And I call this rhetorical violence, because there is a connection between between rhetoric and violence. And so the circle of violence showcases the dangers of interpreting memory through the lenses of classical rhetoric and poetry. And specifically, I'm going to show you this through the figures of Brunetto Latini and Pier delle Vigne. And so what I argue is that in Dante, Dante dramatizes this understanding of memory through these two figures, because both characters show a preoccupation for the memory of their name or for the fame of their works among the living that is completely disjoint from what they're suffering in hell. So in Inferno 13 and in Inferno 15, Dante gives these two models to make his readers realize how a self-centered understanding of memory leads to a solipsistic, narcissistic, and ultimately pointless plea, right? So what's the structure of hell? Hell is organized according to Aristotle's ethics. Hell is not organized according to Christian ethics. That's purgatory. Purgatory, you have the 7 deadly sins, right? And if you look at the movie 7, when I often show when I teach Dante, that shows cases how purgatory is organized. Hell, no, because hell is human. It's created by humans, and therefore it has human ethics, which is Aristotle's. So it's organized according to this, and so the first part, the first cycles, is all incontinence. So it's all people who could not have a measure, right? They could not follow the golden mean of Aristotelian ethics, and so did something too much. So lust is too much love, right? Too much love leads to lust. Gluttony is too much love for food, right? Avarice is too much love for money, right? So it's too much incontinence, excessive desire. Then you have the heretics, those who could not stand to the orthodoxy. And now what interests us for this talk is the violent. Now the 7th circle, or the circle of violence, is divided into 3 different circles. Violence against others, violence against themselves, so the suicide, which is where we're going to start, and then violence against God and nature, which is where Brunetto Latini is. For sodomy, apparently, but then we're going to talk about why is Brunetto Latini there and what really is this later. But so keep this in mind. And then finally, the 8th and 9th circles are fraudulence and traitors, and that's worse for Dante. It's worse for Dante to betray someone than it is to kill them, in a sense, because betrayal, fraud, is using your brain, your intellect, for evil. And so it's perverting the gift that God's give you, right? We are free because we have an intellect. We are free because we can choose. And if you choose to use that freedom in order to betray others, especially the last one, the traitors, is betraying relatives, homeland, or party. So it's betraying people that have a right to trust you. So that's why betrayal is worse than fraud. Fraud is just betraying anybody, and treason is betraying someone who has a right to trust you. And that is perverting God's gift of intellect. That's why it's the least of all of that. But all of that to say that we are now, and this entire talk is going to be here, in the 7th circle, right? In the circle of violence. And we're going to look at how rhetoric is part of violence, how we use, again, intellect, how we use words to create violence. So Dante meets Pier delle Vigne in a wood. And I love this image from the Olcott manuscript. So we begin our journey in Inferno 13, when Dante encounters again the suicides. And their punishment, this is poignant, their punishment is to be eternally transformed into trees. And this is something that Dante, of course, takes from Virgil, the episode of Polydorus in Aeneid 3. So it's kind of like that. There's many moments in which he's rehearsing that. But it's also something else, right? What is this, right? They are losing their human form. They are transformed into trees because they rejected their body. So the pilgrim, violently escorted by Virgil, enters again in another dark wood, and it's even a darker wood. So there is language that echoes Inferno 1. It's kind of another entrance into another new and darker forest. So So from the beginning, Dante uses rhetorical artifice himself. And he's creating, and you can imagine this look, right? A very powerful mental image. And this is an imago agens, an acting image, which was used in the arts of memory to help people remember. Because we remember a talking tree, right? Talking tree is something memorable that sticks with you. So the talking tree is an echo of an A3, and he introduces himself as Pier delle Vigne, the chancellor to the Emperor Frederick II. So Dante is creating this image in the style of the rhetorical treatises such as Cicero, the Orator, or the Studio-Ciceronian Rhetorica ad Regnum, which is going to come back. And he's also trying to warn the reader against the dangers implied in a literal understanding of rhetorical memory. Namely, the danger is that of intending memory as a monument, as a self-serving, static representation carried forward even after death. Dante had already encountered someone who talked about the dangers of memory. Quickly, in Inferno 5, when he meets Francesca da Rimini, who is a sinner of lust, right? So someone who loved too much, as we've seen before. And Francesca da Rimini tells Dante, there is no greater sorrow than to recall in wretchedness the happy times. And that your teacher knows. And so Francesca knows that in Inferno, memory is not sweet. It's not something to be sought. She knows that memory is part of the punishment, that it hurts. It's a source of pain. And the pain is from the renewal of the feeling of loss. And the pain of knowing what they've lost and the fact that they're going to be forever stuck in the eternity of Inferno. She clearly states, and you can read it here, right? Remembrance in Inferno is mostly painful. And then she defers for a better clarification of these feelings to your teacher. And the scholars have been trying to relocate this, your teacher, it's probably Virgil. But apparently Virgil knows the effect of remembrance upon the souls in Inferno, but he never says anything. And so I have a part on that on my book. But for that, you'll have to read the book, because it's another problem. For now, what I only want you to know is that this is the first danger of rhetorical memory, right? So the first danger of rhetorical memory is the pain that it creates into the soul simply to be in Inferno and remembering the happy times in a time of sorrow, right, of wretchedness. Then we're going to look at the second and the most dangerous trap of memory, which is, with Dante will illustrate in Inferno 13, through Pier, right? That solecism and narcissism that I've told you before. So this time, the whole encounter is described in very dramatic terms. We've seen we are in between talking trees, and we are in a very dark environment. But also, I'm going to add another layer here, and the layer is the politics. Because Pier delle Vigne is not just any sinner, he has a political, influential position, right? So he wants to redeem his fame. And exactly to convince Pier to speak to Dante, Pier doesn't want to speak to Dante and Virgil at the beginning. He has to be lured to speak. And so Virgil tries to entice him exactly with a reference to his fame. Virgil lures Pier to tell them the story with a promise that Dante can clear up his name. Because Dante is allowed, you understand, Dante is allowed to come back, right? Dante can come back. And so Dante can be of service to all these people because he can tell people the truth about them. So what prompts Pierre's speech is the desire to clear his name, to redeem his memory, as he says here, right? So Pier delle Vigne, if you don't know again, was the chancellor to Frederick II. He was condemned to being blinded for betraying his lord. And then he killed himself while in prison in order not to carry the shame of this sentence that he perceived as unjust. So this is what history tells us. But Dante's poem narrates a different tale through the mouth of Pier. And Pier is clearly like a character in search of a post-mortem redemption, a sort of inverted damnatio memoriae. He's looking for a redemption of his memory. So the redemption of his name is Pier delle Vigne's main aim, and he tells us clearly, right? So this very strong plea that he says here, and if one of you returns to the world, let him comfort my memory, which still lies prostrate from the blow that envy gives it. And so when Virgil promised then to rehabilitate his fame, then Virgil allures Pier to speak. And Pier starts a speech. And this speech is really interesting. And we're going to look at it closely now, because this speech revolves very much around the pronoun I, me. And you can see this is a speech of a narcissist. This is clearly the speech of someone who is self-involved, self-centered. Let's count, right? He says, you so allure me with your sweet words that I cannot keep silent. Might it not burden you that I am enticed to talk a little? I am he who held both the keys of Frederick the heart, turned them, locking and unlocking, so softly that from his secret I kept almost everyone. So faithful was I to the glorious office that for it I lost both sleep and life. So in this mere 8 verses, Dante clutters at least 8 first-person pronouns, conjugates almost every verb in first-person singular. So you can see Pier is completely self-absorbed. In his own past, he's telling his story from his specific point of view. So this insistence on first-person narrative is then combined with this plethora of rhetorical figures. He uses alliterations, reduplications, words that share common roots, like again, locking and unlocking, serrando and disserrando, two gerunds with opposite meaning. And this repetition mimicked in speech the techniques of the art of memory. So Dante fills also the next passage with 2 entire verses devoted to alliteration and grammatical variations, again, right? You can see, inflamed all minds against me, and then in flames did so inflame Augustus. You see, like repeating the same word again. And even more, this repetition is placing a great emphasis on the works of envy, right? It's envy that's doing all of this, right? Envy made everybody against him. He didn't do anything, poor him, right? He didn't do anything. It's all envy. And envy is the thing that turned every other member of the court against him, and he spread malevolence and eventually reached the emperor and burned the ties of trust that linked him with Frederick. This is, of course, Pierre's point of view, right? So the next set of terzine contribute to understanding Pierre's ulterior goal in this rhetorical retelling of the tale that led to his death. He says, right, my mind, in scornful temper, thinking by dying to escape from scorn, made me unjust against my just self. So you see, again, Pierre takes no responsibility for his own suicide. He took his own life, but this entire speech is devoted to divert the accusation of betrayal, right? He's saying nothing against the fact that he took his own life. His rhetoric is basically to justify himself from saying, did not betray my Lord, and also, I did not really kill myself, right? It was envy that made me kill myself. He was a just victim of the personification of envy herself. So this is a completely self-absorbed discourse. Again, there are more first-person pronoun, me, right? Again, alliterations. Again, giusto, ingiusto, just, unjust. So what I want you to focus now on is how, bear with me, there is a connection between Pierre's rhetoric of reduplication with Pierre's self-centered narrative and his insistence on clearing his name, on comforting his memory, what is this connection? Well, this connection is Dante telling his reader to be careful about memory. He's underscoring this trap of memory. But how do we see this, right? Well, we need to look at the role of repetition in a rhetorical theory of memory. So we need to look at things like Aristotle on memory and reminiscent, or Aquinas on his commentary on Aristotle, right? That all kind of stress the importance of repetition. For it, right? To memorize, you need to repeat. I mean, even now, right? To memorize, you repeat. And even more importantly, in the pseudo-Ciceronian Rhetorica de Regnum, that though Dante thought it was of Cicero, at Dante's time he still thought it was of Cicero, specifically talks about reduplication. And he lists reduplication as, and repetition as devices to stress one point and to impress one audience. So he says, right, reduplication is the repetition of one or more words for the purpose of amplification or appeal to pity. And the reiteration of the same word makes a deep impression upon the hearer. So, through Pierre's entanglement in his own mind, through his insistence on first-person pronouns, use of alliterations and reduplications, Dante shows how deeply his soul fell for this trap of memory. So imagine Pierre is there as a tree, stuck forever, and the only thing he's still thinking about is his fame at the imperial court. He's still worried about the fate of his memory in the land of the living, even if he's suffering in hell. So I believe that Dante chose Pier delle Vigne as the main character in the Suicide Woods exactly because he's a politician and because he's the emperor's chancellor. I think that there is an intentionally anti-political quality to the infernal memory, which is well highlighted by Pierre's suicide in order to avoid dishonor. The trap in which the chancellor has fallen is that of self-centeredness, solipsism, and solitary arrogance. He doesn't care. If he could have stayed there, you know, blinded and alive, and he could have tried to warn other people about the fact that he had not betrayed the Lord. But no, he could not bear that shame. He was too self-centered. Because he couldn't bear that shame, he not only condemned himself, but he also didn't do a lot of good that he could have possibly done, right? And that's what Dante's underscoring here. He was not a good politician. He did not care about the fate of the others. He only cared about his own name, and he still does, right? So these three vices are the three main characteristics for infernal memory. Memory in Inferno is a trap because it's not placed into the larger context, because it doesn't serve any other purpose. Memory should be for others, to help others. If you are not helping others, if you're only helping your name, if you only care about your fame, the remembrance of your name, then you are in hell. You are in your own hell. So we're going to see a similar version of this when Dante meets Brunetto Latini. And it's another example of a sinner that is so blinded by the thought of his own earthly fame to completely disregard what's happening to him in hell. And so Dante encounters Brunetto Latini in Inferno 15. We're still in the circle of violence, and we are among the violent against nature. So after an elaborate metaphor, which compares the margins of the infernal stream through the dams by the river Brenta near Padua, Dante shows fire. And you can see it here. There's fire coming down on the sky. What's their punishment? These sinners, the violent against God and nature, have to run perennially. They can never stop. Again, they're stuck. They can never stop. And they have to run. And they are dominated by fire, this fire that have to, rains on them. it rains fire. I love, again, this image from the Olcott manuscript. So the pilgrim and Virgil have just left the woods of the suicide. And so now they encounter a new cohort of sinners. And again, they're looking at Dante because, again, Dante is alive. And that's a strange thing, right? No one alive goes ever through hell. So they are shocked. They're looking at him. And they can't understand who he is. And he can understand who they are. And there is a problem here, and that's a problem of recognition. Think about recognition. In order to recognize someone, you have to remember them. So there is that problem. And Dante, at the beginning, looks at someone and is like, I should remember this. It looks familiar, but I can't recognize him. And so this is the figure that he encounters, Brunetto Latini, who was Dante's old mentor. So he's supposed to recognize him. But he can't because he's burned. He's too burned by the fire. And so he cannot. But Brunetto instead recognizes Dante immediately. So he can immediately recognize Dante, and he's very marveled. And he says it exactly that, right? What marvel! And so this beginning already points the reader to the possibility of failure in memory. That if you can't see well, you can't recognize, so memory can fail. And then Dante now squints and strives to recognize under the layer of burnt flesh the familiar lineament of his teacher. And so the moment of recognition then is described. With, again, references to the Aristotelian theory of knowledge, because the intellect, Dante's intellect, has to work in order to recognize it. And how does he do it? Through his voice, because the voice is the same. Brunetto's burnt face is not enough to prevent Dante's intellect, together with the voice, to recalling the image of his teacher. And there is this recognition is a kind of recollection. And recollection is the main intellectual ability of memory. So memory is divided. When I talk about memory and recollection before, the Aristotelian theory, I said memory and recollection. Well, the main point is there is memory and there is recollection. And if you think about what is memory and what is recollection, we go back to those metaphors that we looked at the beginning, right? Memory is the storage. Memory is literally like your hard drive. Recollection is your system of finding. Recollection is Google, right? Recollection is you put it there, and how do you retrieve it? Is your retrieving software. So storage is passive, but recollection is active. And you need your intelligence, you need your intellect in order to recollect. So that is what goes on here. And why is Dante able to recollect Brunetto? Because he cares about him. And he has affection towards him. He's his old teacher, right? And so he matches the rational with the emotional. Dante remembers Brunetto because Dante cared about Brunetto, and thus is why he's able to recognize him. So the affection between the pilgrim and the new soul here is evident in how Dante salutes his old teacher. And he greets him with the title Ser, right? He gives him an honorific. He's calling him Sir, right? He's giving him the voice form, which he only does for is also with his cacciaguida, with his old great-grandfather, and is one of the very few people that Dante gives the honorific form. So yeah, and he was also a knight. Cacciaguida was also famous to be a knight, so literally a sir. So the encounter with Brunetto in Inferno 15 posed a big puzzle for all the critics. because, as I was telling you before, we need to talk about this a little bit, because the sin that he accuses Brunetto is a sin that's explicitly sexual. It says sodomy, right? Violence against nature. Well, what I propose to analyze this, and I mean, there have been a lot of people who have already started analyzing this as, so I'm following in like Gary Cestato's kind of framework. But I also think that there is an additional layer of this, right? This violence against nature is also because Brunetto used his brain to do things that were not exactly what Dante thinks would be doing. For instance, he writes in French. So that one of the big betrayal, right? You should write in your own vernacular. Dante believes in writing in your own vernacular. He believes in writing in Tuscan. And Brunetto wrote mostly Le Livre du Trésor in French. So there are lots of problems here, but I believe that there is also the problem that he charges Brunetto with being too solipsistic, like Pierre. Too much inside his own mind, caring too much about the fame of his work. Dante denounces Brunetto's shortcoming in understanding the nature of time, eternity, and fame. Exactly in the moment in which he seems to extol him as his teacher. So Brunetto Latini was a prominent Guelph who spent many years in Spain, exile in Spain and France, and he composed his encyclopedic work, The Trésor, in Old French, before returning to Florence in 1266, after the defeat of the Ghibellines. So Brunetto was the most influential promoter of the Ciceronian tradition of rhetoric and eloquence, and he translated in many Cicero works. And he was probably, for real, Dante's teacher, and Dante depicts him as a father figure and as a teacher. And there is no documentation of Brunetto's sodomy, okay? There really isn't any real documentation that he was that, or that would be a problem for Dante. What I think really is going on here is that he's accusing Brunetto of a kind of intellectual sodomy, right? Of using French instead of Italian, and of using, being culturally and politically sterile. This unnatural rejection of his own mother tongue, an unnatural opposition to the imperial authority because he was a Guelph, right? So some kind of unnaturality in that. So when they encounter each other, Brunetto asks Dante, how is he there? How he is arriving? And what I want you guys to focus on is that Brunetto was the teacher of Dante, and specifically the teacher of classical knowledge, right? The translator of Cicero. And how important it is for Dante that he's showing this teacher eternally stuck among the damned in hell. And how Brunetto, even there, continues to care about the sake of his works, his trésor. I love the fact that he keeps saying, il mio tesoro, and looks like Gollum, right? My treasure, my treasure. It has this like amazing moment there. Brunetto Latini, though, is, I argue, and I hope that you guys will see, is the direct correspondent of Pier delle Vigne. Both characters have this singular fixation of their egos, exemplified in Pierre's solipsism and Brunetto's self-aggrandizing. They exemplify these two different aspects of violence applied to the intellectual sphere. While for Pierre, this violence is the politician, still concerned about his reputation, even among trees, Brunetto is a writer, a teacher of rhetoric, still preoccupied about the afterlife of his intellectual production, even when fire is literally raining on him. So, in Dante's encounter with Brunetto, this thin layer of respect conceals a pointed criticism. While outwardly honoring his teacher, Dante subtly condemns Brunetto's failure to grasp the true nature of memory, and particularly the ties to time, eternity, and fame. So Dante reveals Brunetto's limitation here. and because he's fixated on the survival of his works more than on the survival of his eternal soul. So Latini is still attached to the allure of his worldly glory. He calls Dante my son, and again, this familiar figure, and it takes back the position of instructor when talking to him. And although Brunetto is sharing in the same torments as all the other sinners, it's kind of like detaching himself from the others. He calls them my band, la mia masnada, and their suffering are described as their eternal damnation, I suoi eterni danni, as if he wasn't not part of them, right? He's trying to dissociate himself from the people who are suffering in his circle. And then Latini asks Dante, as I said, about the identity of his guide and how it was possible that he arrived there. And he's trying to reinforce his role, like he's trying to be again Dante's teacher, even from hell. And you can see that he, even in the representation, he tries to separate himself from the others. And Dante, again, does a short summary of Inferno 1. He recounts the story of how he arrived there. He says, in my earthly life, I was lost in a valley, and this one, and he doesn't name this one, and this is important. This one unnamed here led me here. By not revealing Virgil's identity, Dante is focusing the readers onto the fact that Brunetto cannot recognize Virgil. And so we have here a teacher of rhetoric, a teacher of classics that does not know who the great poet Virgil is. He is unable to recognize him. So one of the shortcomings of Brunetto is his lack of classical poetic knowledge. And again, Brunetto continues, and he's like unaware of the fact that Dante has not said who his leader was. And he alludes again to his position as Dante's teacher, and he's giving then a prophecy. He gives Dante a prophecy of his exile. And he mentioned how he realizes right away that Dante was going to be a great pupil, right? That he was going to go through a glorioso porto, a glorious heaven. He was going to arrive following his star. And he attributes himself the power of foreseeing the future because he has astrological knowledge, and gives this prophecy of Dante's exile. But even in this moment, he's calling about fama, fame in the world. And he's again criticizing the Florentines for being avaricious, envious, and proud. Again, Florentines get very bad mouth. And again, Brunetto foresees Dante's successes, but also how he will become an enemy to both factions in the power struggles in Florence. This is not the first prophecy that Dante has received. So thankfully, Dante is already steadfast. He's ready to accept Brunetto's admonition. But how he replies reveals his ambivalent nature towards Brunetto, right? At the beginning, he's very sweet and respectful, uses the formal voi again. You can see, this is the prophecy. And then we can keep going here. And he says, right, in my memory is fixed the dear and kind paternal image of you when you, many times in the world, taught me how man makes himself immortal. So he is, in a sense, being really respectful and really thinking it. But on another sense, if a closer analysis, these are highlighting a strategy to distance himself from Latini, who is damned. Because this is a mistaken concept of fame. It's mistaken a human understanding of eternity, right? There are lots of subjunctives in how this is worded in Italian, and it's acknowledging that Brunetto is in fact condemned to hell, and he cannot really live eternally if not in pain. And that's the problem, right? It's forever fixed in my mind. This word vita means the fixity here, right? It's fixed in my mind, like the fixity of Brunetto's concept of memory. Brunetto himself is an object in Dante's storage memory, right? He is, again, like Pier, a memory image himself, running around with the brain of fire under him. And this excessive concern for temporal glory is also evident from how Dante remembers him teaching how man achieves immortality, right? It's a fierce irony here. All revolve around the reflexive verb in Italian, eternarsi, to make yourself eternal. Brunetto did indeed make himself eternal through his writings, right? His works are still read and studied in Dante's day, and now, though, but Brunetto did not pay attention to the destiny of the part of his body that was really eternal, his soul, right? So yes, he's eternal, but he's spending eternal life in hell among the fires of violence, in the seventh circle. And it would be even funnier if you guys understood Old French, because he's echoing. Dante's playing with Brunetto, is playing with his words, like it's being kind of cruel in a sense. And it's very respectful, but he plays with the words of the Tresor, because like Tresor also began with the heading, how man, come l'uomo. So it's literally like rehearsing the Tresor to Brunetto's face. It is acknowledging his depth to Brunetto, but is also showing how Brunetto did not manage to understand what really meant to be eternal, right? So Dante's wording reflects Brunetto's instruction, but Dante's philosophical training allowed him to surpass his masters, because he knew that to be really eternal, you need to be saved. You need to use your intellect for the others and not for yourself. And also about his prophecy, Dante doesn't immediately talk about his prophecy. He then goes ahead and says that his prophecy will need to be checked. And that's it. Yes, this is all the part of immortality, but this prophecy will need to be checked. The problem that Brunetto has, right, is that he mixed a rhetorical notion of memory and fame, and he was not able to recognize his immortal soul. So he fell, like Pier, for the infernal memory trap. And also, again, we've seen, he will say that he doesn't want to talk immediately about his prophecy. He will wait, and he will wait for when he arrives in Paradiso with Beatrice, and Beatrice will be the one to interpret those words, right? He doesn't need Brunetto as a teacher anymore. He will have another teacher, a better teacher. Both Virgil, but especially Beatrice. And I'm moving to close here. Because Dante's all teach, so the blessed in heaven will see, like Beatrice, right? Beatrice is blessed in heaven, and so she sees directly what happens in God. She will have access to divine wisdom, and so Beatrice will be able to help Dante more than Brunetto. Dante's old teacher is unable to help him anymore. He cannot even help himself, again, running under the fire. So, with the closing of the episode clarifies how Latini is only stealing a few moments of calm from his never-ending running under the fire to have this conversation. The dialogue will have to end fast, because a new bunch of damned souls approach, as Brunetto is forbidden from intermingling with them. He can only add one last sentence of farewell. And he says, right, you can see it here in the green, let my treasure in which I yet live be commended to thee, and I ask no more. So even in this moment of everlasting parting with his pupil, Brunetto's final words do not ask for himself or for his soul. Yet his final wish is for his literary legacy to be entrusted on his literary masterpiece, Le Trésor. Brunetto commands his Trésor to Dante so that he can live through his writings. He is the main representative of a classical and poetical concept of memory, is a titanic and tragic trust in a life through fame. And Brunetto becomes here the champion of this Horatian concept of memory as a monument. Horace in Ode 330 had written, "Exegi monumentum aere perennius," I erect a monument more lasting than bronze, right? That's memory as a fame. But Brunetto's trusting in this follows an earthly logic. He trusts a temporal fame. He believes that he still lives through his writing, but his immortal soul is in hell. Not only that, but at the time when time will end, when there'll be no more earth, there will be no more memory of the Tresor, right? So Brunetto is the negative example for an earthly intellectual who is focused only on the pursuit of his eternal fame through the weapons of knowledge and rhetoric. But Latini, the teacher of rhetoric, has not absorbed the lessons of philosophy and theology. He's still fixed in the time that he was Dante's teacher, and he still believes that the intellect allows man to become eternal through fame. So Dante portrays Brunetto as this tragically mistaken figure whose misplaced trust in an afterlife through fame makes him a paradigm for a writer in a pointless pursuit of worldly fame as a way to achieve eternity. Brunetto's battle against time, fought with the weapons of rhetoric, ends with him forever damned to hell. So Dante shows his old teacher fallen for this trap of infernal memory. His insistence on fame as the only part of him who will live on is then exposed as this like illusory comfort, right? He has no other comfort. He's ensnared, his inside mind. It's always like Pier delle Vigne, right? They're both in their mind, and they're both in the seventh circle of hell. Now, the last question is then, was Brunetto a sinner of violence against nature? What is this connection between sodomy and rhetoric? So again, scholars have argued again that about the language in French or the Tuscan vernacular, but also that he might have also done the idea of some sodomy, like the ephebic love, which was common in Greek, in Greek. And in the Renaissance, in a sense. But what I believe here is also that Dante chooses Brunetto Latini because he's the main vulgarizer of Cicero and of Latin rhetoric, because he's also using his intellect badly as a rhetoric and the rhetoric form of memory, without any ethical concerns, right? So I think that Brunetto embodies what happens to an intellectual when they become too fixed in achieving their fame, when they intend memory as mostly a fixed image. So rhetorical memory becomes detrimental when it's conjugated with a literal understanding of the power of poetry to create everlasting fame. So I believe that Infernal 15 shows the futility of this form of memory. Brunetto's fame might even last until death, but his soul will still be in hell, and eventually the time will end, and there will be no more memory, no more people to have this memory, because Lethe will also erase any memory of any sin, and since Brunetto is a sinner, there will be no more memory of him, right? The only memory that lasts is that you regain through the second river, so there's only the memory of good deeds. So it's totally erased at the end. And also, Brunetto will forever sprint, as is in the pregnant image at the end of the canto. He's like one of the people running in Verona in a match, like in the game that they have in Verona, and and he's not like one of loses, but one of winning because he's running forever, right? So Latini, the rhetorician, will continue to run in circle. He will try in vain to escape the fire that will burn him, as is shown in the final image of the canto, as fast as the winner of the race in Verona, forever unable to stop, sit down, and rest. Thank you. And I hope that we are in time.
Yes, do we have any question?
And I do hope that there are questions. There are no bad questions, and I know that there was a lot of stuff. Oh, thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Well, thank you. It was very interesting and all very convincing. I especially thought it was interesting, the readings of those particular episodes, because, and the sort of self-serving dimension of them, because they're a lot of times read, or they're sort of the more, they provoke an emotional response a lot of times when you first read them, so it's interesting to see that sort of rhetorical dimension that you highlight. I was wondering if you see any moments in Infernal where you see memory functioning in a non-egocentric way, or if you see any of the passages there, or all of the passages where you have characters sort of recounting or relying on memory, whether it's all in that sort of narcissistic realm. The one that kind of came to mind for me, and it's been a while since I've read through it in detail, is Infernal 33, where you have this memory that doesn't really seem to be serving to, it
You mean
doesn't seem to be a
Ugolino?
Yes.
Oh,
it doesn't seem to be a
thank
memory
you.
that is intended to build up this figure, but then at the same time, there also is kind of a rhetorical performance there. So I don't know if you see examples where it breaks from this model that you've highlighted, or if it's all in sort of the heading of self-serving.
So thank you so much for the question, because it's a really interesting question. But for I have two answers, because the answer to the larger question is there are moments in which memory breaks from the self-serving, but that's only when Dante breaks from being a character. So when we're talking about when Dante breaks the fourth wall, when he's the poet and not the pilgrim, then you have moments in which memory is positive. So his own memory, because he's using it for us, for the future, and our memory, the memory of the readers. When there's that moment, that's when memory is positive. In all the characters, so no, I have a reading in the book of Ugolino, and if you look at that, what is Ugolino doing? Well, first of all, I have to admit, Ugolino's episode is very hard for me, and it's even harder after I became a mother. Like it's a terrible, really, really hard.
Can you recall us what the Ugolino example is?
Yeah. So this is Ugolino. Count Ugolino was condemned with his children. So he was. Sorry. He was in the Tower of Hunger, which is I was able to visit in Pisa last September for the first time, because they opened it for the night of research. It's amazing. You guys can go to Pisa and now go in the Tower of Hunger where Ugolino was shot with his children. But he was the real problem here, right, in the Ugolino, and I am going to explain both at the same time, is that he uses this narrative, this very rhetorical, to, again, what do we think about when we read that? We think about how unjust it was that he was punished this way, and his children punished with him to die of hunger, closed in a tower, because Ugolino really did betray his faction. He was actually correctly imprisoned. It was incorrect to maybe imprison his children with him, and Dante does say, "Oh, Pisa vituperio delle gente," in a huge like a rhetorical speech that Dante then does against Pisa for also killing the children. But Ugolino is trying to push away, like all the others, and almost every, this is actually amazing. I haven't found one episode that goes against this. All the sinners in hell push away the responsibility of their sin. And that's partially the difference between Inferno and Purgatory. Not so much the acts that they've done, but the fact that they do not take any responsibility for their action. And so they might or might not want memory. That's different. But for sure, they use memory in order to not appear as culpable. So they're creating a narrative that is an exculpatory narrative. He never says, like, we never know why was he imprisoned. Right? What's his sin? Why was he there? And why is he in Inferno? Why is he in Inferno, right?
Well, it's interesting because it seems like that point, it's all of the passages that you have these very rhetorical performances that are perhaps, as you say, it's like almost the signal. Paolo and Francesca, also Ulysses.
So all of them, Ulysses, yes. Oh my God, we could go about Ulysses. The other really important one, I have a talk where you look at Pier and together with Guido da Montefeltro. And Guido da Montefeltro is the other main, with rhetoric, even more than Ulysses. And again, it's another political figure. Right? It's another political figure and another figure that, and he doesn't want fame, right? He doesn't want, he's the opposite. So there are, but yes, almost all of them use rhetoric, and almost all of them use memory in this, care about memory for just the memory of the name, and not what you can do with the memory. And this is the real difference with what happens in Purgatory. People in Purgatory care about memory because it can do something for them. So like in the ante-purgatory, you start with all of this, remember me, remember me, remember me, remember me, which really means pray for me. And so that's the difference, is in between the sheer remembrance of a name and a remembrance that does something positive and that helps others. Does it make sense? And
yes, therefore, I agree with the convincing. I totally thank you for this speech. And also, while listening, I was thinking, oh my God, how envious I am. You know, Dante, poetry, memory, all of these, while I work on stupid political passing stuff, and I look at this eternal thing, I say, blimey. Anyway, so I have two questions. One is, so you have used the word memory a lot and you search memory, but you have also used concepts like solipsism, narcissism. So clearly there's lots of language, and I actually was looking at if any of the psychologists were around.
yes.
You're using lots of concepts straight from psychoanalysis. And so,
I am.
what is your relation? And of course, it's for the students, for you, that Dante's travel in itself with the psychoanalysis, who is Virgilio, into his past and memory. It's a total psychoanalysis of work of psychoanalysis. So, my first question is how you position in relation to all of that and all of that tradition of reading, let's say, the Divine Comedy in this way. Second question, besides here, I see also the testament, the will of Brunetto that leaves the treasure to his son in knowledge. Anyway, but my second question was, so we have two different memories, however, at least there are many more, but let's say two different memories that I'm asking you. One is private memory, like the memory of the sin that makes that kind of going back. But most of the time you're dealing with public memory, which is completely something else. The memory of the treasure, the memory of his fame, of his scene, of the Pier delle Vigne, all of that is public memory. So it's the way will be remembered in public, and not the memory of the scene, which is private, and in this case we don't even have a relationship. Of course, probably Dante, being a teacher, knew about that scene of Brunetto, but let's say that's beside the point. The point is between the, let's say, the public memory and private memory, which are two completely different things.
So yeah, so thank you so much. I mean, these are really big questions. The first one, well, really thank you, because it's important, and it's very important for me to situate myself within the context of psychoanalysis. One of the things that I do is I've also looked a little bit at trauma studies. I've tried to literally, in the book, I'm trying to place it, yes, in the content of contemporary psychoanalysis. In a sense, I started by looking at Recur. Because Recur, memory, history, forgetting was one of the main prompts. Like I looked at it and I'm like, well, you know, he actually talks about Dante and memory, and then he leaves it there. I have a little quote that I could find for you somewhere of Recur, talking about how memory is fundamental for Dante and nobody has studied it. And so Recur gave me the beginning in there. And so I look at it in a sense, if you want to say, how do I situate myself? Yes, Recur would be the main point. Jungian looks, in a sense, also because I interpret Dante's use of, for instance, astrology in a very Jungian way, like as tropes. On the other hand, though, I do need to say that the other thing that I do in the book, because I am a medieval philosopher by training, is I look at this in the context of medieval theory of psychology. So I do that a lot. Like, there is no doing this without the De Anima. There is not doing this without looking at both Albert and Aquinas' commentary on Aristotle's De Anima. How is it looking? How is then influenced through Avicenna and Averroes? In fact, this is something I'll look more in Paradiso. Because one of the things that I think, why do we have Unoi? Why do we have this second river? Like, so we forget sin, we're all happy, we don't have sin. Why do we have to remember something? Why is there Unoi? And you have to understand Unoi is important, Unoi is a question. Nobody knows about Unoi. Unoi is Dante's invention. The name itself is Dante's coinage, was never used before. The idea of two rivers in purgatory is found in two stories only in the Middle Ages, so probably one in Isidore of Seville that Dante had read, but unnamed and without function. And Dante takes Lethe that is in Virgil in hell and brings it to purgatory. So it does an enormous thing on the hydrography there. But why? And why is that connected to psychology? Well, because we need our memory in medieval psychology this year, in Aristotelian psychology, we need our memory as, you know, I'm going to go back to the beginning of my talk. We need our memory to be ourselves. Memory, together, there are two principles of identification, two things that make us in medieval psychology, and one is the body, and the other one is the mind. Right? So when you're dead, till the day of judgment, all of the souls, including the blessed ones, none have not just Pier delle Vigne, who is a tree, but none of them have a body, right? They will get another body after the day of judgment. They'll have the body of glory. They'll be happier and everything. But till that day, how do we avoid being only one intellect? So the heresy of Averroes. Averroes, who was, of course, a thinker from the Arabic world, So he was not constrained in the same way as the Christians were. He could do more things. He believed that all the souls became one after death. So the unity of intellect. And Aquinas went against that big time. And Dante's kind of following Aquinas, but I believe he has his own solution. And his own solution is eunoia. Because the other principle is the mind, specifically the memory. And so, yes, we lose the memory of what we have done badly in Liti because we wouldn't be happy if we had the memory of our sins. And there's a lot of theologians that talk about us, Peter Lombard, and from Augustine on. But then we regain the memory of a good sin with eunoia. So we have something, so we are unique. And so we are not Averroists. So this is kind of like how I'm positioned. So I use both modern and medieval psychology, in a sense. It is a very, very long question. We could keep going, but just for the sake of, I think. So the second question was on
public memory and intimate memory.
Yeah, so public memory and intimate memory. The problem here is memory as fame. That's a monument, the oration thing, that's public memory. Yes. So all of these souls are kind of like, but the memory of your sin is what puts you in hell, right? So yes, they're kind of preserving it. So and I'm linking it to sorry, Andy. Yes, to Henry's question, because it's connected in a sense. And for instance, in the figure of Guido da Montefeltro, you see this very well. He only cares about his public memory and not about the private memory of what he's done. But at the end, the devil that snatches him, and there is a psychomachia battle for his soul, it doesn't matter, right? I think Dante will tell you that the economy is problematic. We have one memory, which is our internal one, and the public one should be a reflection of that. And all of this, again, gets fleshed out better in Purgatory. The more I study Dante, the more I believe that the crux of everything is Purgatory. Because in Purgatory, then he has this invective against fame, right? Purgatory's hand, and pride. Pride is the main sin, right? Pride is the first sin. Pride is the root of all sins. And if we care too much about our public memory, that's the problem. And you have people like Pier Salvani, the big, who is a prideful soul. But why is he saved? Because he debases himself for a friend. So what's the only way to get out of that problem is altruism. If you do something for another, then if you stop caring about your public memory and you only care about how you can help others, then you're saved. And again, you have a general there, right? Yeah, who probably killed a lot of people, but he's saved. How is it possible that a general that's against a lot of the things that Dante stood for, why is he saved? Well, he's saved because he helped a friend, according to Dante, right? So he wants to show, I have an article out on Dante in Siena, because of course I'm from Siena. And in that article, I argue that Siena is purgatory. It's called The Other Model, Siena as a purgatorial city in Dante. And all the people from Siena are in purgatory. Right? And Florence is heaven and hell. It's both the best and the worst. And Siena is kind of like in the middle. But that's what it is. What makes you saved is when you detach yourself from yourself and you start being for others. It's that detaching moment, right? So why are all the people in hell, all of them, so within their minds, their memory, most of them, but all of them completely within their minds, because they can't detach themselves from sin. I'm going to go a step further and leave you by saying that I believe that that's hell. Hell is being in your mind. In a sense, we punish ourselves because we are stuck there. They can't get out. If they could have gotten out, they would be in purgatory. But because they couldn't get away from themselves, they are in hell. If you're able to detach, if you're able to take responsibility for your action and detach yourself from your action, that's already in purgatory. Then you can be saved.
Do we have any other question? If not, I have the last one.
Okay, that's going to be the hardest.
No, it won't be so hard, but probably something to think about. Is really to cancel history mostly, so not probably on
On history?
Yeah, but the idea of Dante and memory and how Dante will be remembered. So Dante for 5 centuries was totally forgotten until, let's say, Longfellow in the US, until, let's say, De Santis in Italy. So he was felt up out from the ashes of memory and not remembered. The question is the following: what kind of relationship we have now between Dante, memory, and the way in which Dante approached to memory? Because evidently, Dante is putting some sodomites in hell. So will we have the same situation for Dante in the future or not? What's the discussion among those who are experts in the field?
Well, that's a very big question, and in a sense, in the last years, it was not easy to teach Dante, right? Because when you teach Dante, you need to explain people, well, I'm Muslim. Why are all the Muslims in hell? Why is Muhammad in hell? And why are there fewer women? Why Dante's wife is not there? Dante's not modern, right? I mean, that to me, though, it's about being a medievalist. And it's about, I hope that this book does one of the things that show that it doesn't matter. What we need are the ideas. And yes, I believe it's still going to be very, very meaningful. But every text, Dante among them, only matters to us because of the questions we ask, right? Our question are what makes the text new, right? Dante could not imagine, in a sense, that we are reading it this way, though I think he did. I think in my perceived way, he did. But again, I'm a medievalist. I was trained to think like a person from the Middle Ages. And that's what I love to do. Like when I teach my students, I love to show them, like, I'm taking you through in a journey through time. And I'm going to show you how they thought. Not because I agree with how they thought, not at all. Oh my God, like I'm very happy that we have vaccines. I want to be vaccinated. That they didn't have it. Right? I'm very happy that we have modern science. I don't believe in the influence of astrology, but I believe that we need to understand astrology to understand Dante and all the other people who believe in astrology now. So again, through maybe a Jungian lens, right? What I believe though is that it's to us, it's up to the Dante scholars now to make Dante relevant and to make Dante not be used as a way to quench other people, right? You don't want to use it to say, and at the same time, it's not like I teach an inclusive Dante, but I show how if you read Dante as a medieval person and you place it in its context, right, then that's the historicizing, that's the contextualizing, that's the using medieval philosophy to understand Dante, but also modern psychology. Through this way, you show how he was doing what he was doing at his time for his reasons, but what he can tell us now is a different thing because the questions we ask now are different. So I think a little bit of both is why. But to answer part of your question, I also believe that we need to understand why Dante was not read for 500 years. And that I found really interesting. So I read a book, I still haven't published this article, but I'm about to. When I was at Notre Dame, because when I did my master's at Notre Dame, and I came across this 1592 book, Piero Curzuto, Le Riprensioni, and it's a book about language, right? Part of the history of the Italian language, and in this book he's arguing that Petrarch is the better, like the old Petrarchists don't believe in Petrarch as a style, and in fact this guy goes even further and he really cares about Tasso. This is the controversy between Tasso and Ariosto, more Italian style, and he even goes as far as saying that we should not read Dante because Dante is not a poet. It has texture where Dante is not a poet. Like, because his language was too varied, right? So we need to understand why they didn't read it and why they took it back. The political reasons. So there are, in the debate of the scholars, there's a lot of people like Joe Luzzi, for instance, people like Jason Houston, who is here, who wrote great books about reclaiming Dante from different historical perspectives, right? And basically, but like a lot of the Middle Ages, what you guys think about the Middle Ages, most likely, if you were in my medieval studies class, most likely is the 19th century version of the Middle Ages. Yeah, you have a 19th century imagination of the Middle Ages that's superimposed, right? And that starts with the idea of the Middle Ages. Where does the word Middle Ages come from, right? And it starts with Florentine humanism. It starts with people like Flavio Biondo and Leonardo Bruni. And it starts with them saying, oh, we are very different from the others. Come on. From a point of view of history, material history, they were living exactly in the same way. Nothing had changed at all, but they were very different. Yes, Petrarch had rediscovered some manuscripts in some libraries, and that's it. But they claimed such a difference, right? Historically, I believe in the long durée. I believe that there is basically no difference in the way people really lived on their day-to-day lives till the Industrial Revolution, big time. But yeah, so I think we need to place Dante in that context. Does that answer you?
Thank you very much, Eleonora.
Thank you, guys.